Let's say there's an X in the picture. Like this. And this is, let's say, A, C, B, D, E. And I know there's an X in the picture. I'm going to look for vertical angles, correct? So I'm going to say to myself, the statement would be angle ACE is congruent to angle DCB, and the reason would be definition of vertical angles. So whenever you see an X in the picture, you can add that as a note. You can say these two angles are equal because they're vertical, okay? So you're going to be looking for X's. So if you have a shared side, you can write, you have to acknowledge that because you need sides and angles to prove that things are congruent. And the reason's going to be reflexive. Remember we talked about reflexive as something being equal to itself is the silly geometry rule, algebra rule.
Wait, does that say
Whenever you see parallel lines, so let's say I have this, and this is equal to this. That's parallel to that. You can look for alternate interior angles. And so the statement on this picture, let's say this is A, B, C, D, E, is angle B is congruent to angle E, because if those two lines are parallel, the reason is definition of alternate interior angles. There are two other alternate interior angles. Does anybody know who they are?
A and B.
Yep. Yep. Angle A is congruent to angle D.
And C and C.
Well, and we know that too, but that's the X. I'm just dealing with the parallel lines right now. Yeah. We also know that does not help us as much having three angles, because remember AAA is not a way to prove that they're congruent. But those two will work, or maybe the C and the C and one of those two. So you can say both of those are alternate interior if the lines are parallel. So if in the given it says that AC bisects DB, it could also bisect an angle, but if it bisects DB, then the given is given, but then you know that DC bisects means what? So bisect, whenever you see that, it means cuts in half. So then you can say DC is congruent to CB, and the reason is, this is your statement, your reason is definition of bisect, okay? Let's say we have the same picture, and they say this, the given says that given AC bisects angle DAB, what can we conclude there? That this angle is congruent to that angle, because if it bisects an angle, it cuts it into two equal pieces. When you see the word bisect, you've got to figure out what two pieces are equal to each other, because that'll give you another clue to get to the end. If I am proving that two triangles are congruent, These are the only 4 reasons I can have at the end of my proof. For now. There's more, but we haven't learned them yet. So if I'm proving that parts of triangles are congruent, meaning like angle A is congruent to angle D, or side AB is congruent to EF, I have to first prove triangles are congruent. And then the reasons are up here, those reasons. And then I prove parts are congruent, and the reason is CPCTC. And that stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Now, if you look at your cheat sheet, I told you that triangles can only be marked congruent with the reasons SSS, ASA, AAS, and SAS. Okay, those 4 reasons.
Yeah.
You have it on your notes. So I'm given that 1, AB is congruent to XY, and I would just write them all in one line. AC is congruent to XZ, and BC is congruent to YZ. And the reason for that is given. Got it? So when I mark my picture, do I have one of the 4 SSS, SAS, AAS? We have SSS, right? SSS is one of them. So I can move in for the kill and prove it. The given kind of gave me everything. This is not a typical proof. Usually you have some steps to go. So I can say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle XYZ, and the reason is SSS, which is the only one of the 4 reasons you can use to prove that 2 triangles are congruent. So the first thing we're going to put in our proof is the given. RS is congruent to UT and RT is congruent to US. So we have 2 sides. So if we're trying to prove 2 triangles are congruent, there's only 2 reasons that have 2 S's in them, because SAS doesn't have 2 sides and AAS doesn't have 2 sides. So it has to be one of those 2 reasons. So now you look at your cheat sheet and see what else does this picture have that you can list as an issue. Next step is TS is congruent to TS. Duh, everything's congruent to itself.
Connected.
And well, it's the same side. It's a shared side. And what's the reason for it?
Reflexive.
Very good.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to mark that. That's something I marked myself, right? Do we have enough to say, Sarah, do we have enough to say that they're congruent now? At our side. So it's not this guy, it's this guy. So triangle RST is congruent to triangle UTS, and the reason is side, and we are finished. So here it says, given S is the midpoint of QT. And QR is parallel to TU. Now, as these proofs get a little bit longer, you could put one given at a time and then make your conclusions, or you could still dump all your givens. I am okay with you dumping all your givens on the first line. So we have statement and reason. So the first thing we're going to dump our given. S is the midpoint of QT, and QR is parallel to TU. When I see the word midpoint, what does that mean? What can you conclude if S is the midpoint of QT?
It's also the midpoint of RU.
Nope.
Oh, I think I know.
You're gossiping.
I know.
What?
Sorry, I'm kind of cheating. But
Now, they told us that S is the midpoint of QT. They did not tell us anything about RU, okay? So I can conclude midpoint means that it cuts it into two equal pieces too. Remember, bisector, but midpoint means that it's the exact middle of the road. If I'm finding the midpoint between here and your house, the distance between that midpoint and here is the same as the distance between the midpoint and your house, okay? I'm finding the halfway part. Like, you know, whenever you're driving like a long way, like to Florida, and your parents say, oh, we're halfway there. Isn't that like a good feeling? Like, oh, okay, well, we can do this.
Well, it depends on how long. Sometimes.
So the reason for this would be what? What would you use as the reason? What word let you conclude that QS is congruent to ST?
Definition of midpoint?
Very good.
Oh, I just looked on the other side.
So when we do something in the picture, we made a conclusion that was valid, not just any conclusion. We mark it in the picture, okay? So I have a side. So I have one of the S's, right? Now, what do I know from this picture?
Side angle side.
Well, you don't know that yet. What do I know from this picture? What else can I conclude?
Parallel.
There's parallel lines, right? So what angle is congruent to what angle because of definition of alternate interior?
Q and R and U and T.
Nope.
That angle Q is congruent to angle T and angle R is congruent to angle
Oh, I
U.
think it's alternate.
Angle Q is congruent to angle T. So let's mark that in green. And that's definition of alternate interior angles, which it says if alternate and if lines are parallel, then the alternate interior angles are congruent, okay? And I'm okay with you putting definition of alternate interior, but that's really the reason. So we have two ways we can go here. We can do, from here on down, it's your choice.
I did
If I see angle U is congruent to angle R, they're also alternate interior with this transversal, okay? So these two are equal. And that's also definition of alternate interior. Or you could see that there was an X in the picture, and you could put that angle RSQ is congruent to angle UST, okay? And then you would get this is equal to this, right? Everybody see that?
yeah.
So if you picked this reason here, you can conclude that the two angles are congruent by angle side. And if you pick the vertical angle, you could say angle side angle, because it would be a different reason. So your proofs could look differently. Let's write this down. Angle RSQ is congruent to UST. And that's definition of vertical angle, right?
Will there be a really hard one like this on the?
Yes. But the reason for if you pick these three is angle, side, angle. You got it? But if you pick the other one, it's angle, side. So it just depends what you pick of what the reason is. You have to use the right reason for the job, okay? And depending on what four of these you chose, it could be either AAS or ASA. It just depends on what you chose. So the second one is GE bisects DEF. That means it cuts that angle in half. So I can write that as definition of bisects, that those two angles are equal. What does this picture have on your cheat sheet? It has a shared side. So this is equal to itself. Everybody get that? GE is congruent to GE, and the reason why they're congruent?
Because of reflection.
Reflexive. Everything's equal to itself. And now you go in order and you say angle, angle, side. Do we have enough to say the two triangles are congruent?
Yeah.
Yes. DEG is congruent to triangle FEG. And that's because of angle, angle, side, which is a valid. That does not spell donkey. And then now can we say that the parts are congruent? Yes, you can move in for the kill. After the triangles are congruent, you can say the parts are congruent. DG is congruent to FG, and the reason is CPCTC. See how you use that reason at the end when you're proving parts are congruent?